there's sort of a saying in Mexico that if the cartels chase you, they'll eliminate you, your whole family. But if you go to them and face them, then they'll execute you, but not your family. So I worked on that assumption. But I also worked on the assumption that I built a friendship and I never exposed them. And there was a possibility. And I knew I couldn't outrun them, regardless of what the US said, the US government guys said. Witness protection, we can plant you in Europe. I didn't trust them. So I went back to Mexico.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinths.
In the 1980s, Keith Bulfin was on a path to peace and prosperity. He was a husband, father, and stockbroker who was content living the rest of his life in Melbourne. But after a chance encounter with one of Mexico's top narcos sent him to prison for 3 years, his life went pear-shaped. Afterwards, without any say in the matter, Bulfin found himself splitting time between San Diego and Mexico, between a fake family and the Mexican cartel.
Where do you think the beginning of your labyrinth is?
I ran a bank, investment bank, and had about 12 employees. And I had this phone call one day from a client of mine who said, I've got some South American people renting my house, and they want to bring in $3 million to buy a house on the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, where their children were attending elite schools. So I said, yeah, I'm quite happy to help them. And so I met the family, and they seemed a nice family, and they were coffee importers from South America, and they had coffee plantations as well. So I set up a company for him and arranged for the funds to be brought in from Argentina. And unbeknownst to me, we were being under surveillance by the DEA, the FBI, and also by the federal and state police from Australia. As it turned out, the guy I was helping was in fact the main banker for the drug cartels of Mexico and Colombia. And he was a fugitive on the run, and he was in Australia on a false passport. So I had this knock on the door at 7 o'clock in the morning by federal and state police who said, we would like a word. And I said, do I have a choice? And they said, no, you don't. So they came in and told me that, and showed me, did I know this particular person, Carlos Cabal.
Mexican fugitive Carlos Cabal Peniche wasn't a brutal cartel boss. He was a multimillionaire banker who's been linked to money laundering allegations against Raul Salinas de Gortari, brother of former Mexican President Carlos Salinas de Gortari, and Gulf cartel drug boss Juan Garcia Abrego.
And I said, I don't know him. They said, yes, you do, and here's the photographs. But he was under an alias name, and I knew him by the alias name. And they said that he speaks very highly of you, and he thinks you're quite a creative banker. You seem to know everything about moving money, which I did legitimately in his transaction. And they felt that I could become the key to the financial operations of the drug cartels of Mexico and Colombia. So when they told me this, I said, no, I've seen the film Traffic. There's no way in the world that I'm going to be involved. Mind you, I didn't know anything about any more about the drug cartels. We certainly didn't have Netflix with the Narcos series and that type of thing. And they said, well, we are going to arrest him and put him in a maximum security prison. And in doing so, we're going to throw you in with him. Your job is to build a relationship with him so you can convince him that you can be the next banker for the drug cartels.
Can I just pause right there? Are they allowed to just throw you in prison?
They said, well, what we'll do, we'll comb through everything you've done over the last 20 years and we'll find something. And the DEA guy said, if we don't, we can always create something.
Okay.
So they combed through everything I did and came up with a where I had um, talked to a valuer of a major property and said to the valuer that maybe we should change the valuation because we have taken into consideration certain factors. And they said that is a conspiracy to defraud. So we want you to plead guilty to that offence. And if you do, then you're in prison with these two Mexicans, and then this is an opportunity for us. I said that ain't going to happen. So I employed lawyers, but I was fighting an uphill battle. I had everything. They froze my assets, froze everything I had, and threatened to charge my son with a misdemeanor, which would have ruined his life. So nothing I could do but to accept a guilty plea on this charge, which is, like a 3-month sentence, if that. But I was thrown in a maximum security prison with these two guys, and with a lot of promises. Promises of, we'll look after you, we'll provide you with financial incentives, we'll give you bonuses and everything like that. But so I spent 3 years at a maximum security prison because it took me 3 years to convince Carlos Cabal that I could be his friend.
Whoa. So wait, 3 years of your life, because you were given the impression this was going to be like a 3-month sentence, but they kept you in there until you developed a relationship?
Basically, that's what happened. And they said it was they gave me a maximum term of 3 years and said they worked on, so instead of 3 months, which I was told, it ended up being 3 years. And then they sort of did high fives and thought, well, this is great because this is a long enough time. And if Carlos Cabal wins his appeal and is thrown out, you will be moved out as well. Good behavior, that type of thing.
Question, how old were you at this time?
51.
I mean, 3 years is a long time of your life. Like, what were you doing for 3 years in prison besides trying to, like, play cards with this guy? Like,
No, you couldn't, because where the unit I was in was what they call is a maximum security unit and a maximum security facility. So there was 20 inmates in that in this what we call Serious East. 17 never to be released, and 3 bankers, 2 Mexicans and myself. So when 60 Minutes and all the overseas television shows did their program, they said this doesn't stack up. You got 17 inmates and never to be released, 3 bankers. So this was set up from the very beginning. You're with 2 Mexican bankers. So I was interviewed by 60 Minutes and documentary programs from Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, and they all come to the conclusion that this was a setup by the DEA from the very beginning. It was just too obvious because if you were committed a white collar offence, as you would know, you go to a low facility farm or something like that. So that after the 3 years was quite daunting because you're stabbed twice. You get beaten up a few times, but that's because people who you're living with have no future. They're in there for horrendous crimes. Carlos, actually, being who he was able to protect me, and that was, I think, the whole strategy. He ended up protecting me and paying for protection and also looking after me, so no one touched me, after the first 12 months. But as soon as I was released, I was sent, this is what everybody talks about, I was sent directly to the United States, to San Diego, within weeks of my release, to set up a covert banking operation in San Diego.
who arrived at your doorstep and said, now we're shipping you to the United States?
Federal police. Within weeks, I was on a plane in San Diego, meeting the DEA, and then everything was. It was an amazing situation because when you work with the cartels of Mexico and Colombia, you can't have your own family with you, so because it's too dangerous. So they gave me another family, a German family, a girl and her 3 children who were 7, 5, and 3 years of age. So it was convenient. So when I arrived at the Holiday Inn in La Mesa in San Diego, she was already there. She arrived the day before. So we were sort of introduced, if you like, and because we had arrived a day apart, we spent time traveling around San Diego and exploring, looking for accommodation because we thought we'd do it together. We're both new to the place.
Can I ask, you met her, but presumably also these children. Who were these children? And wasn't it dangerous for them to be involved with this cartel situation?
They didn't think so. They thought because I'm the one traveling to Mexico all the time, and they in turn living in San Diego had the protection of the DEA.
Okay.
So I know. So Carlos was extradited back to Mexico, and I flew from San Diego back to Mexico to meet him. And of course, he was oozing with wealth, so he was able to buy his freedom. And so all the charges against him were dropped.
How did you get in contact with him? Did he get in contact with you? How did that arrangement happen?
Whilst in prison, he said to me, I think what you need to do is come to Mexico. We've become friends now, and you need a new life, a new beginning. So why don't you come to Mexico and I'll look after you? And I'll set you up. And that's what basically he said. And those conversations were all recorded by the DEA and the federal police. They knew this was going to happen. So every time, when you're make a phone call within the prison, that's listened to. And also that bugged certain areas. They were convinced that this relationship would mature, and which it did.
So, but what did you tell him while you were still in prison? You weren't planning on doing cartel banking, like.
No, definitely not. So to make it more difficult, I'm a New Zealander. So basically, if you commit a crime and spend, more than 1 year in jail, you can be deported. So just to make sure I play ball, when I was picked up by the federal police at the prison and taken to immigration detention centre and said, right, San Diego or New Zealand, what's your choice? So that was it. So I knew I had to take the job. So, yeah, so when he arrived back in Mexico, he really looked after me and said, well, I think, if you've set up a banking facility in San Diego, we can work together. I'll introduce you to clients and open the door for you so you can, become a banker like you were in Melbourne. But I didn't trust the agencies because of the whole situation had gone pear-shaped. Everything they promised, they did the opposite. So I made it an issue from my perspective. I would never betray Carlos or his associates. So the balancing act was, how do I do this? Because I played chess, so I try and work out how do I protect him, but at the same time give something to the DEA so they don't upset them. So I thought, well, maybe I can give them certain information that won't affect me or won't place me in danger. And those that they really would like to have information on and charge, I will protect. So that was a balancing act. And I just didn't trust them from day one. Everything about agencies and what promises they gave me never worked out. So I tried to protect those, who I work with, but certainly Carlos Cabal. And but it was quite an emotional journey, being down in Mexico trying to launder money for the cartels and stay alive.
Keith Bulfin thought surviving 3 years in prison was the hardest part. But once he was released, his real mission began. Sent to San Diego to set up a covert banking operation, Keith was thrown into a dangerous double life, playing the role of a trusted cartel banker while secretly working for the DEA.
Every time I flew to Mexico, I had the feeling, is this going to be a welcoming party or I'm going to be okay? But as it turned out, it was okay initially. And I think the deputy director of the DEA said to me, the life expectancy in an undercover agent in Mexico is 6 months. You're either dead or we pull you out. Because I think working in Iraq during the war would have been an easier assignment than being in Mexico. But I played the professional banker, so I was always professional. I never got partied with the cartels. I never went out with the girls. I never drank. And I just strictly did the business banking and then disappeared back to San Diego. But the fact was I didn't record. So one of the problems from the DEA's perspective, I wasn't recording meetings. And the reason for that was the cartels have intelligence units with them and they can find recording devices quite easily. So I didn't want to record. So after several years of operating with them, a couple of years, they decided that I needed an agent, which they called Al, who had 27 years experience working in Colombia as an undercover agent for the DEA. He was Colombian. And so I met him and they said that I met him at 4:00 on a Sunday afternoon. And they said, you're both going to Mexico at 8:00 tomorrow morning. So go out for dinner, get to know each other. And this time Al will come with you, but his role is to record all the meetings you attend. But Al was like a lot of agents. They're cowboys. In other words, they don't really are professional in what they do. But the thing is that when I went with him to go and have dinner, he said to me, look, you enjoy the dinner. I've arranged for a girl to meet and I'll meet her and we'll catch up in the plane tomorrow. And I said, well, let me just put it in perspective for you, Al. When I go down to Mexico, I actually work out the strategies of what I'm going to do. I go through what if scenarios, if this goes wrong or if that goes wrong. And we need to plan that. We're going to attend a few meetings, so we need to talk about the strategy, how we can attend the meetings, what could go wrong, and if it does go wrong, what we can do to get out. He said, no, I've had 27 years experience. I know what I'm doing. So I never saw him until we boarded the aircraft in San Diego to fly to Mexico. And then he said he was too tired. He slept all the way down to Mexico City. And when we got to Mexico City, he disappeared. So I knew then he went off to get a weapon, and that's what he did. So the following morning, we'd have our first meeting. So before the meeting, I had an opportunity to have 5 minutes of time with him. I said, we're having a meeting. It's a banking meeting. We're meeting bankers of the cartels. So they'll ask some questions about banking. So don't answer any questions. Leave that to me. And if they do ask you a question about anything about banking, refer it to me. Say, this is Keith's job. So when we get to the coffee shop in the hotel to meet these two bankers from the cartels, they were suspicious of him because the DEA said, don't tell anyone you're bringing him down, just surprise them, which is, you don't do that. I argued against that point, but they wouldn't. Oh no, this will be okay. So the two bankers were suspicious of him. And one of them said to Al, okay, well, I'm going to ask you a question, and Keith is not to answer it. Tell me what you know about interest arbitrage. Of course, he's not a banker. He had no idea. And he couldn't answer the question. And they said, well, you're not a banker. And at that point, the waiter turned up and in Spanish said to him, would you like another cup of coffee? And Al responded in Spanish, no, I don't. I'm okay. And they said, you're Colombian. Your accent, you're a Colombian. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's had 27 years experience. He's just blown this whole thing apart in less than 5 minutes. So he panicked and I panicked. We phoned San Diego, the DEA headquarters in San Diego, and said, look, we need to come home because we've been exposed. And I explained the situation, and they said, no, you've got a meeting at 2:00 with Colombian, well, not at that stage, Mexican bankers and a Mexican cartel leader. So you need to attend that meeting. As soon as you've attended that meeting, come home. So when we arrived at the hotel for the 2:00 meeting, I was extremely nervous. Al was as well. And he was panicking, as I was, because we'd blown this meeting at 10:00. And we knew that there was a possibility we'd been exposed as undercover agents. So when we arrived at the hotel, went upstairs to the room where this Mexican banker was, and his two clients were coming. They were about to arrive. And when we arrived at the hotel, we saw a team of bodyguards. So we knew that it was a high-profile Mexican cartel leader. But when we arrived in the room, the Mexican guy said to us that the two brothers that were coming to see us were actual fact Colombians. So Al had spent 27 years and he had been exposed to everybody in Colombia knew he was a DEA agent. So he in turn said he was going to use the bathroom, and he went to the bathroom, and I'm standing there thinking to myself, this is going to go pear-shaped. They're going to recognize him, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I didn't have a weapon. So I moved to the wall of the suite. It was a hotel suite. So you open the door, you've got a suite, and there's a desk, and the Mexican banker's behind the desk. And then there's a bedroom to one side with an ensuite. Al was in the ensuite. The banker was behind the desk with the sun coming in behind him, so that when you looked at him, you had to adjust your eyes. And it was just that scene when the Colombians heard the toilet flush and then focused on the door, and then Al appeared and weapons were drawn. So Al was killed immediately. One of the Colombians was killed. The Mexican was killed, and the other Colombian was injured. And I didn't even get a scratch. So I'm against the wall, and at that point I had to try and stay alive. So my role at that point was I rang the DEA and said, this is the situation. And they then told me, this is what you ought to do. These are the instructions. So I thought at that stage, everything they said to me, I did the opposite. So I thought I had to get out of Mexico myself. So I managed to get out of Mexico not listening to the DEA. I did everything they didn't. I did everything. I did the opposite of what they said. But I managed to get out of Mexico, and then they said to me that we'll put you in a safe house, we'll protect you. We got the German family here, Claudia and the 3 children, and we'll head to DC and we'll start closing the accounts and seizing the assets. At that stage, I thought to myself, the Mexicans and the Colombians were, like 48 hours behind us. Wherever we went, they appeared. So I knew that I couldn't outrun them. So going back to the beginning of the story, what I did was I always protected Carlos Cabal and protected those that I thought if things go pear-shaped, they would look after me.
Even if you were undercover?
They didn't know I was undercover agent.
Got it.
So I in turn then thought to myself, I can't outrun them. There's no way in the world we can hide from them. So I sent Claudia and the family to Europe, and I went back to Mexico. So there's sort of a saying in Mexico that if the cartels chase you, they'll eliminate you, your whole family. But if you go to them, and face them, then they'll execute you, but not your family. So I worked on that assumption. But I also worked on the assumption that I built a friendship and I never exposed them. And there was a possibility. And I knew I couldn't outrun them, regardless of what the US said, the US government guys said, witness protection, we can plant you in Europe. I didn't trust them. So I went back to Mexico and I saw Carlos and also other people in Mexico City who I had protected. And I said, I'm not an undercover agent like everybody is telling you. If I was, I wouldn't be here. And as far as the Colombians are concerned, that whole thing went pear-shaped. And I sort of gave them an explanation, which they partly believed. And they said the decision on your life depends on what the Colombians do. Now, the Colombians gave us money, which I had the DEA wanted to freeze and hold, but I transferred those funds back to another bank account so I could then release it back to the Colombians. I thought that was a possibility. So a meeting was arranged, and the Carlos said the chances of your survival are slim, but we will work for you, but it's up to them. They'll make the decision. So the meeting took place in a warehouse in Mexico City, where there is pallets of cocaine about to be shipped to the US. And the Colombians met me, and the decision was made, and I argued my point, and I survived. I was able to walk out there a free man.
Wild.
But I ended up working with the drug cartel in Tijuana, and they said, well, you need to go to Tijuana, work with the Felix organization, which I did, and they in turn sent me down to Cabo San Lucas. And so I spent a year in Cabo San Lucas under the Felix organization, who run the cartel in Tijuana. So living with the cartel and under their protection in Cabo San Lucas was an experience in itself.
Were you still technically an agent by this point, or was the fact that your whole cover had been blown, you're now a free agent now, but are you now just working for the cartels?
No, I was there. I wasn't doing anything. I was just under their protection.
I see.
I certainly didn't do anything. I just sort of involved in their day-to-day running. They owned the shopping mall in Cabo San Lucas, so I got involved in setting up a small restaurant, and so that was a new experience as well. But yeah, similar journey to yours, Amanda, except that you were innocent of all, and you spent 4 years, which is an incredible journey in itself. And how you've come out to be resilient and who you are today is a credit to you.
Oh, thank you.
But there are a lot of people like you who, and we get caught into these situations. And to say that it doesn't happen, it does happen. If you become a pawn on the chessboard, they will use you. And that happens all the time.
When you were first encountering, the question of this journey to go on, it's a several years journey, started when you were 50, when they were saying, we'd like you to go undercover, and you were like, no way. Did you know that you would eventually end up in a hotel room where people would shoot each other and you'd be the only one left standing? Or when that was happening, did a part of you think is this my life? How is this my life? It seems like there's so many moments along your journey that are so extreme. And I was never in a room where people were murdering each other. So but I've been in this extreme situation of facing down a 26-year sentence as a 20-year-old kid. And I felt like the extremity of it, like the fact that it was so bad, made it very clear about what choices I had to make versus ones that I didn't, what was in my control and what was not in my control. I'm curious to know if you had similar experiences of like clarity of insight, um, or what your experiences in those moments were.
I knew I didn't have a choice to go and work for them, which is clearly the situation. So I thought I'll make the best of what I can. When you don't control it, it's controlled for you. But in Mexico, I was on my own. So in Mexico, I can make my own choices. So, and I thought about my own safety. And one of the things they said to me before I went to Mexico the very first time is they didn't give me that much information and about how dangerous it was. And the point, they said that the less you know, the better off you are. And I think to a certain extent that's right, because if the less you know, because then you're exploring yourself, you make your own judgment calls. So I think that, I thought I was fairly bright and made the decision, be a professional banker, do everything professionally, and don't, get attracted to or distracted by going and partying or socializing with these people because they're terribly dangerous. And you always got to work on the assumption that they're trying to find out who you really are. So you best be on, plan. And I was, as I said to you earlier, I planned every meeting. So where the meeting place took place, or where the meeting was to take place, I would go there beforehand, work out exit strategies. And I would go through my own mind, if they asked these questions, how would I react? And if this goes pear-shaped, what are my options? In the hotel room, I didn't, because at that time we were nervous, we were panicking, and I wasn't thinking straight. And it never occurred to me that the people I was going to meet were Colombians who were, Al was going to, an agent in Colombia. That never occurred to me. But it proved to me that to be an agent, if you can be a very successful agent if you plan and strategize. But at the same at the same time, I was trying to survive. So the whole situation, and I didn't plan on this journey. So this was, I was thinking, how can I get out of this journey? But I went from DEA, transferred to Washington, D.C., and was, started working for the FBI after the 9/11 experience. So, running covert banking operations targeting terrorist groups. But the thing is that it was also, I thought, this is a means. I'm making an income. I can turn this into a good profession. I just got to be smart at what I'm doing. At the same time, I think, I'm going through the process of having all my charges overturned and appealed. So I thought working for the agency is a plus. Winning their support is a plus. And then, when I go to the appeal, I've at least those, maybe they will support that appeal. And the indications are that's what may happen. So it's a long-term strategy, but that's my goal.
After years of living a double life, Keith Bulfin was finally free. But returning to a normal life wasn't so simple. With a past he couldn't talk about, a fake family he had come to love, and the constant shadow of those who might still want him dead, Keith had to figure out what life after the labyrinth looked like.
Can I ask about your fake family?
Yeah, well, that's rather sad. So in the book, I call her Claudia and the three children by different names, but in real life is Cornelia and then Henrietta, Carolina, and Matthias. So we were a family and the family unit. So from the cartel's perspective, who photograph you and trail you and see where you live and what you do. They saw us as a loving family. And I think the smart move by the DEA was to bring us together, because she was 20 years younger than me. So that also helped a lot. But unfortunately, she, I moved them to Europe for their own protection, because when I went back to Mexico, and helped her find a job in Europe, and but she unfortunately passed away 3 weeks ago. She
Oh, wow. You've been in touch with her ever since.
texts her every day.
Really?
Yeah,
Like, I mean, because I was going to ask, like, if you're living with people for years, like, fake family or not, you become a family.
that's correct. So what I did was I text her every day, "Are you okay?" And she'd come back, "Yeah, I'm okay. I've missed the bus. I'm going to catch. You know, I don't like work anymore. I'm trying to change a job." But her older daughter then phoned me, 3 weeks ago, and told me the news. So that was that.
So, what was your relationship with the children? Are you still a part of their lives?
Yeah, very much so.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
you're a unit. You're a family unit. So yeah. So the oldest is now did a master's degree in architecture. So she's and now employed as an architect. Carolina is into nursing, so she is getting married, which what like Matthias is IT. So yeah,
How do you go back to just being a normal person after going through an experience like this?
it's very hard because because you can't talk about what you do. You don't normally. In your case, you've got your husband and you talk, and your group and your family, which a strong bond, so you can talk about your experience, and more you talk about it, the better off you feel in yourself. And I think when you first came back, you found it very emotional. You probably still do in certain areas, but you're recovering every day, so you're getting stronger every day. And I would imagine now, when you get up and talk, there would be moments where you might become emotional, but most of the time you feel stronger in yourself, and you want people to know your story. In my case, it's extreme. Writing the book was an emotional journey in itself, and then when you talked about it, you become highly emotional. But now, several years later, I'm okay, but I still don't talk about my work as such. So I think it's like, and you probably find this as well. It's like if you get a person a soldier come back from Iraq, and then he comes into a bar with his friends. And they say, "Oh, good to see you, Ben. Welcome back. How was it in Iraq?" And he'll say, it was pretty bad." And they say, "Oh, yeah, I can imagine it would be. Oh, by the way, we're going to watch football on Saturday. Let's get a group together, watch the football match." You don't realise what he's going through.
Were you afraid in writing the book that you were going to expose yourself and that the cartels would seek retribution?
Yes, that's why I changed the form, the beginning of the book. I changed that, but Carlos got a copy of the book, and he read it, and then called me and said that I now understand the situation, and there's a few people in Mexico who understand what you were doing, but you never exposed us. You never gave us up. I said no, and they said, "Well, put this way, no one will touch you, but don't come back to Mexico City."
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So you're still under Carlos's protection then.
You feel like because you protected him, he's keeping an eye out for you, which is nice.
Are you still in touch with him?
No, no, no. just a one phone call many years ago. So you obviously don't want to go down that path.
Right. How do you think you've been changed, if at all, by this experience?
You don't trust people, and you become smarter. So what the agencies use me, so I use them now. I provide information on money laundering, financial crime. I'm also now involved in Monitors Foundation, which is the foundation I run, which is protecting vulnerable people against trafficking. So we run safe houses in Africa, particularly close to the refugee camps. So, and my connections to the agencies, I still use them in terms of helping to raise money and that type of thing. But I think, my experience in money laundering and financial crime is as such. I probably know more about it than most people because I was actually laundering money for the Mexicans. Um, but the thing is, too, the agencies then don't trust you either. So there's a balancing.
They think that you might actually be working for the cartels?
No, I don't think so. They just think, oh, well, he might protect, if we get him involved, he might protect someone else. So,
I see.
yeah, so I enjoy the work with the Monitors Foundation because because I was involved in human trafficking, so as an undercover agent. And when I went to the FBI in Washington, D.C., we set up a covert bank to target terrorist groups. And obviously, it wasn't working in the US, so we moved the operations to the Middle East. So I was based in Bahrain. So the idea was to track the movement of money, into Syria and Iraq, but also there's a lot of money being made in human trafficking. So we became aware of people, criminal organisations and terrorist organisations moving people. And then part of the operation was a human trafficking cell in Budapest. So I was moved to Budapest. It was run by the mafia out of Romania. And so I became their banker. And at that time, the human trafficking we thought was basically refugees. But in the case of Budapest, those girls were all for the sex trade industry. So the girls moved to a warehouse in Budapest and then sold to sex trade industry in Western Europe. And my role was we didn't realize the amount of money that these people were handling and the level of corruption within the police, the army, secret service within in Hungary. So it was a matter of how does this operation work. So I met some of the girls, and that's a story in itself.
Well, it clearly left a mark on you if you set up a foundation for protecting girls like them.
Yeah, so we live off a few donations from the US, and we run various conferences in order to raise more money and to keep our operation going. So, but it's a daily exercise because unfortunately, a lot of the government agencies like Red Cross, UN, um, traffickers dress up in their uniforms and kidnap these girls, and the girls thinking they're going to be taken to a safe spot, and they're actually sold for slave labor or for the sex trade industry. And it happens a lot in the Middle East and Africa and also Eastern Europe.
No.
So it's a massive scale.
It sounds like you've been exposed to some of the worst of humanity.
That would be it in a nutshell. Yes, absolutely.
How does that feel?
I think that it feels good if you can make a difference, but it's something you can't really talk about because you can talk about it to a certain extent, but you can't sit down with your friends and say, so what do you do? Because they're all sort of retired and going on holidays and enjoying their grandchildren, as I do. But the thing is, I'm doing a job as well. So I don't talk about that aspect. And that's probably from the upbringing of being an agent as well. You just don't talk about it.
That sounds very, very lonely. Like, when you came home, were you suffering from any kind of PTSD? Did you have a therapist?
No, I didn't have that. I think there was a case in point where there was a female agent and I working in the Middle East. Her name was Joanna from Washington. And on an assignment in Jordan, and it went pear-shaped. So she was put on a plane and sent back to Washington and has had therapy ever since. And the guy said to me, I think the best therapy for you is to head to a chair in North Africa and be involved in human trafficking. That's your recovery. And that's what I did, into North Africa.
Where would you say you are where are you on this journey? Are you still in the labyrinth? Are you out of it? Um, do you feel lost, or do you know exactly where you are and what you're doing?
I know exactly where I am and what I'm doing. So in terms of the foundation, I want to build that and make it successful. So I wrote a book about that. So it's part of this TV series. It was number one in Australia for 22 weeks. So it has a lot of people have read it in Australia and New Zealand. It has a global appeal, and I think that a lot of people who've read it have asked the very question. You're set up from the very beginning, which is the case. But it's they talk to me about it. It gives me an opportunity to get feedback.
What are the takeaways? I mean, it seems like there's not a don't do this or you might end up in as a drug cartel banker. Like it's not that kind of book. Like it almost was like a tsunami hit you, the perfect storm, and you just ended up in these insane situations. Like how does your story resonate with people, and what are takeaways that people can take from your story?
I think most people who read the book think that I was clever in terms of being playing the professional role and also being a strategist and working out the different strategies of how to stay alive. And whatever the agency said, turn left, I turn right. Um, so, and they felt that, obviously, I think a lot of people will say, well, if we get caught in a situation similar to yours, we would like to be able to do exactly what you did.
Did you always feel like you could trust your instincts?
I do now, absolutely.
You can find Bulfin's novel Undercover, a novel of a life, at any online bookstore, and you can learn more about the Monitors Foundation at monitorsfoundation.godaddysite.com.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Bluesky at amandaknox.com.
At wisecracker.bsky.social.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. And sign up for our free newsletter at amandaknox.com to get the latest on all our work.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp. Da da da. Da
Yeah.
da da da. It's no good. You have a Amanda Knox. It's iambic.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, Amanda Knox.